Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here with you today at Thumbcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Anita and I am here with a delightful gentleman that I enjoy spending time with and chatting with. This is my co host, Andrew.
Hi, I'm Andrew Kircher. Anita, I am so excited to be back here with the Thumbcast.
I'm so excited.
This is really exciting because this is kind of new.
Yeah, absolutely. I love new things.
Yeah, if you're not fun, I love both new and old things. I think anybody who
Yes.
knows me knows I do have a penchant for the old things.
Yeah.
But new's cool too.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about that because we want to get to know you a little bit too, Andrew. You just said something quite interesting. You like old things as well as new. So tell me a little bit about
It's
some of your hobbies.
It's true. I am a lover of history. Anybody who
Yeah.
knows for more than 15 seconds learns that. I love old things. I've spent a lot of my career working in the museum world, with public history.
Fabulous.
I'm from Port Huron, so Blue Water area
Nice.
history is kind of my
Okay.
jam. I love reading, writing, and even kind of living it. So,
Yeah.
when I'm not reading about history, I'm out like wrenching on an old car or working on an old gun, something like that, or working on my old house. So,
Yeah.
history is definitely something that I'm constantly thinking about.
Very cool. Do you have a specialty in history like American world, specific region, or all of it's just
Yeah, well,
interesting to you?
all of it's kind of interesting to
Hmm.
me. I really enjoy Michigan history.
Okay.
I worked for like a decade up in the Straits of Mackinac. It's one of my go-to conversation starters because
Nice.
everybody loves Mackinac. Everybody loves
Of
going up there.
course. You're not a real Michigander. No, I'm just kidding. If you haven't been to Mackinac, look, it's okay,
Right,
but you can
it's
still
you
get
just
there.
haven't been there yet
You haven't been there yet, but
because
it's a thing
that's
to
the
do.
list.
You need to
Yeah.
do that.
So I lived and worked up there for the state park. So I was like one of the redcoats. I fired
Yeah.
cannons and muskets, and I even worked security for the Grand Hotel. That's always my
Nice.
if there's ever like a big lull or somebody wants like a good story, I could tell you about living The Shining and living at the
Oh,
hotel by myself over the winter.
you know what? I
So
feel a future podcast topic coming on. We need to get into that, dig deep into that. That'll be so cool. I love that.
So yeah, always kind of there in the background, but I've lived kind of all around the state
Yeah.
and moved back to Port Huron over half a decade ago. It's home for me and my wife now, and
Nice.
I love getting to talk all things Thumbcast. So,
Wonderful. Wonderful.
but you are back in Port Huron, or you're in Port Huron now,
Yeah.
but you have called a lot of different places home.
Well, Michigan is home, 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 but I am a native Detroiter, born and raised. That's where I come from. I spent a couple of years in New York when I was working there, but when I moved back to Michigan from New York, I came to Port Huron, and I found such a fabulous, fascinating community here. And like I said, I'm from Detroit, so I'm definitely a city girl and an urban girl. But there's something so beautiful about this region. The people were very inviting and welcoming, and I just found my home here. So definitely, I call Port Huron one of my homes. Detroit is home, but Port Huron definitely is home to me as well. And just love being here, love the area, love the atmosphere.
So it's one of those questions. The further you get away from Detroit, maybe the more leeway you have about like when people say, they're from Detroit or they live in Detroit.
Yeah.
Because if you're really local right here, like when somebody tells me they're from Detroit, I still sometimes question like, okay,
No, where
are
are you
we
from?
talking? Yeah, like
You from Detroit
are
proper?
you from
Like, where are you
Detroit
from?
or
Yeah.
like Livonia? Because Livonia is
Exactly.
not
That's
Detroit.
different. Now, because I am a traveler and I travel a lot, you have to tell people even if you're from Port Huron, you kind of have to tell people you're from
Right.
Detroit
Yeah, you get a
because they
certain
don't get it,
radius.
But definitely, I grew up in Detroit proper. I moved to the suburbs, probably when I was like 10 or 11, but still stayed in that area, graduated from Southfield High. I went to Wayne State, I'm a Wayne State alum, very proud of that as well. But yeah, so definitely grew up in Detroit proper, but in that metro area. So there's a lot of areas that we can identify as Detroit.
And I always love that, Port Huron has a really distinct, I think, culture and feeling from Metro Detroit. It's
Oh,
always that question of like, do we count or not? Because we get a lot of our news or the radio stations, or the
sure.
TV channels. It's
Yeah,
like we're getting the Detroit um,
of course.
association, but we're not really Detroit.
No, 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 no. And people in Detroit, I remember growing up in Detroit, and I would get on 94 and I just see Port Huron, which way you could go. You go to Chicago or Port Huron. And I thought, my God, where is that? I
I
don't know
know
where
one
that
of
is.
those two.
I've been to Chicago. What is that? What is Port Huron? So it's very cool. And I love that we're going to have these conversations because I think people in Michigan who know that Port Huron is there, even if they've never been, I think it's something that will just get them excited about it and let them learn a little bit more about it. So I'm excited about that.
I think one of my favorite little trivia facts is that Port Huron appears on more road signs in the state of Michigan than any other city.
Oh, because it's the end of 94. I mean,
And 90 and 69.
and 69, right.
Yeah,
It's,
so you've got two like major highways that are ending there. So you can go all the way across the other side of the state
yeah.
and you're still like, where's this one take you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's very cool. So excited to do that and excited to bring kind of the perspective that I have, especially with me traveling so much and going to different places and having that more of a global perspective, just bringing that to the table here at Thumbcast.
Because you truly are a world traveler.
Oh, 100%.
I think one of my favorite facts about you, you're one of the few people I know who has been to Antarctica. Been all over.
Maybe 4 times.
That's not an accident at
No,
that point.
it's not an accident. No, I am a performer by trade. Always, went to school for music, always did music. And Detroit, of course, has a fabulous music scene, always have.
Absolutely.
I don't think you realize it how impactful it is until you like leave and
Right.
realize how much is going on in Detroit and the quality that we have there. But that just caused me to have such a passion and a desire for it. And I worked in other areas. I've worked in public relations for General Motors. I've worked in the credit union world. In Port Huron, but I just really have always had such a passion for performing in theater that is what I do full time now. And one of the main things I do is that I am a headline entertainer for cruise ships. So I have the opportunity to travel the globe and
Truly
sail the 7 seas and see the world all while singing and entertaining people. So it's very cool. So when I tell people I have to tell people I'm from Detroit. And and be and we do this. Those of us that are Michigan,
That's very true.
we
You can
tell
even get the second hand in there.
we can even get that in there. But we tell you where we're from, and that's something that we're known for. So I
It's
think
so
it's cool.
handy to do.
It is. And that's one of the things that is interesting about what we're doing because we're the Thumbcast. So
Yeah.
what are we going to be dealing with when we're talking about the thumb region?
Yeah, so I think this is one of those things of if you told somebody, you pulled like a random American or even a random world listener and you told them we have a Thumbcast, I have to imagine like, what is there to discuss? Like thumbs, are they fingers?
Like, do we have an index finger cast? Is there a pinky finger cast?
Right.
Like, what are we doing?
But of course, for us, the thumb of Michigan's mittens. We're the mitten state.
Absolutely.
I love that other states have tried to like co-opt this. I have seen some really deformed looking Wisconsins where they'll claim to have a thumb.
Yeah. It's us.
Yeah, so we've got this beautiful couple of peninsulas. Of course, the lower peninsula looks just like a mitten, and we got the thumb.
Yeah.
And the thumb is a region I think most Michigans at least intuit. They understand this. But there's always this question, and that's one of those questions that comes up a lot is how do you exactly geographically define it? Because some things don't have a great definition.
Right.
One of my other examples that I think always comes up is people, and this, if you want to start an online debate, ask people like, where does up north start? Where like everybody knows there's this thing called up north. Right. So I've heard people from like Detroit or like Monroe be like, oh, up north starts like anywhere north of Roseville. Right. And you're up north. Right?
You're in Birmingham. You are so up north,
I think people here, I don't know, one of those questions might be, is it the Zilwaukee Bridge when you cross that? Is it you have to cross the Mackinac Bridge? So I think it falls in that category. If you can make different definitions, I think everybody knows like Huron, Tuscola, Sanilac, like no question. That is the thumb.
Yeah.
I think St. Clair's the thumb. I think St. Clair's is like we're the knuckle.
I call
right?
it the thumb. Yeah.
Right? I have long been a proponent, and for whatever reason, I can't fathom why. I've said that we could embrace being like knuckleheads here in Port Huron
Oh my
specifically.
goodness.
You know, we're the knuckle of the thumb, and we could wear that with pride.
I'm not gonna wear that with pride. I'm just telling you. You go ahead. You wear it. I'll get you some name tags. I'm gonna
Well, if
pass
somebody
on that.
calls me a knucklehead, I'll take it with what they mean, right? But yeah, so we're like this knuckle of the thumb, and then yeah, you get a little bit more question, like you get over to Flint, you get to Genesee, Lapeer.
Hmm.
Is that the thumb? I say maybe less so. That's kind of a different
Yeah.
vibe than generally the thumb
Sure.
because it's a unique area. It's this in Port Huron, we have this thing called the blue meets green, right? And
Hmm.
it's this big initiative. And I think that's so true for the thumb because it is one of the most agriculturally productive regions.
Wow.
You got lots of farming, and you've, of course,
Hmm.
got Lake Huron. You got the lake.
Yes. The water.
And so we are very unique in that sense of like, it's kind of one or the other, especially there's some beautiful rides. You get into the interior of Thumb, and boy, you want to see again a lot of farmland
Yeah.
that they have got a lot of that
Yeah.
going on. So Port Huron really is kind of like the biggest city in a way, I think,
Hmm.
in the Thumb. It's that gateway to everything up there and kind of down the coast. I think all of St. Clair County,
Yeah. Yeah.
Elginak fits that.
Hmm.
I think defining yourself and how you view yourself within the state is one of those big questions for our times.
Sure.
Because as we've seen, Detroit keeps growing, right? Like where
Yeah.
that is. And I think one of the questions that pops up a lot for locals is we start to see like, oh, 26-mile road, 23-mile road, like the
Yeah.
expansions, the work on that.
Sure.
It's basically, Detroit's getting bigger. That sprawl is
Sure. And
sprawling.
becoming more accessible, bringing more connectivity to that area and this area. And I think it's just kind of a joining of melding of some beautiful things.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's having that kind of distinct culture, having that distinct identity that, gets people kind of all emotional. I mean, you can get that down to, hyper levels, like how people define themselves.
Sure.
Like if you want to get really local, like I was a Northern Husky. Like I went to Port Huron's two high schools, right?
Yeah.
So we can even
Of
break it down to
course.
like, do you
Of
live there?
course.
But now I live on the south side. Like I live south of the
Yeah.
Black River, and I've become hyper cognizant of like, that's a big deal in Port Huron. Which side of the bridges do you live
Absolutely.
on?
Absolutely.
Because now I'm like, oh, I'm all about the South Side now.
Right. Of
That's
course.
where I live.
Of course. It's like Detroit. We do the east side, west side. That's an ongoing thing. East side, west side. So no, totally get that as
So,
well.
so that's one of those things I think people can talk about, and will define a lot of things. How you define
Yeah.
yourself, how you see yourself in that broader context of the thumb in the world.
So
So
let me ask you a question.
yeah,
If someone is, kind of scrolling and they're looking for podcasts and they see this Thumbcast and they are from Michigan, but they're not from this area, what would you think they could look forward to?
I think one of the neat things is there's some insights on a pretty unique place in the state. I think the thumb
Sure.
can get looked over because
Hmm.
of our proximity to places like Detroit. Like I joke, I love this area. I moved back here. I
Yeah.
also have lived around the state. This was my choice to come back, call this home. So I could say this to say that, like, as somebody who lived up in the straits, like Port Huron's like where the thumb is a poor man's Mackinac. We've got everything
Listen.
they've got
Yeah.
that it attracts those people to those areas that everyone kind of recognizes as these like tourist based hubs, like your Traverse City, your Mackinac. It's like, hey,
Hmm.
a lot of those things that people are going there for, we've got here, but not as many people are maybe thinking about it.
Right.
It's kind of slept on.
And I think too, one of the things that you mentioned before, like it's on all these signs.
Right.
All these signs as we're driving, as we're going places, and anybody that's from Michigan knows that one of the identifying factors of Michiganders and Detroiters and outside of that is that it's motor city base. Like
Right.
people have cars, you get to some other states and there's other types of transportation, but we really rely on that. And because we drive so much, I think sometimes a lot of people drive through Port Huron and pass it and just think of it as a place that they can pass through, not realizing the gems and the beautiful things that they can experience if they actually stopped.
Right. It's one of those places where I've often joked, like, you do not wind up in Port Huron in an accident because you are either like passing through, you're
Yes.
on one of these corridors and you're like heading to Toronto, you're heading, through the area, but no, nobody, especially further up into the thumb, like nobody's like, oh, I made the wrong turn and now I'm in Port Austin.
Oh
Like,
my goodness, how did
no,
I get to Port Sanilac?
you
I
did
didn't,
not wind up there
right?
on accident.
Absolutely.
You'd be really lucky if you did, but no, and it's a destination worth visiting. So I think that's one of
Absolutely.
those things that people, we hope to have on. We've got already a big long list of guests, people we want to have on to
Sure.
talk about these areas and their specialties. We want to show people because sometimes secrets
Absolutely.
aren't very fun to hide, right? I
Yeah,
like secrets as much as the next guy, but sometimes you
absolutely.
want to shout about something, and that's the way I think we both feel about the thumb, and that's the kind of stuff that you're going to hear on the Thumbcast.
I know it's going to be exciting. Now, let's talk about outside of Michigan. Let's say people are outside of Michigan, don't have any idea. What would you say is going to attract them to this conversation that we have?
Yeah, again, as far as we are as unique within Michigan, we're
Yes.
unique within the whole country in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
We have. I'll give you a great example.
Mhm.
I talked to a group once that asked, like, "Hey, does Port Huron have a museum? Is there any museums in St. Clair County?" I said, "Do we
What?
have a museum? We've got, there's 4 museums in the Port Huron museums. There's a downtown museum. There's a museum
Yes.
at SC4. I think per capita, we might have one of the highest concentrations of some of those
Wow.
like cultural sites
Never even thought about that.
because
Absolutely.
we've got natural beauty like no other, right? The blue water
Oh,
area.
the this the w- oh, don't even get me started on walking on the river, on the water every day. It's just a fabulous thing to be accessible and have accessible to you.
That's one of those other questions that comes up a lot. And that's why, remember, we were just kind of talking about this identity, how you self-identify, how you
Sure.
identify. One of those questions that comes up a lot. And I'm glad there's kind of been this pivot within, I'm saying, the last 5 years towards identifying with that thumb, because before that, for many decades, we're the blue water area.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely true. People are
Sure.
shocked. We have tourists who come to like the Fort Gratiot Lighthouse, which is one of
Oh,
the
the
biggest
lighthouse.
tourist
Fabulous.
attractions.
Yeah.
And they are shocked with like how blue the water is. They're like, "Do you dye this?" I'm like,
Mhm.
"Oh no, that's all natural, right?"
Yep.
But and that was kind of a defined. There's tons of things there: blue water, this, blue water, that,
Yep.
and that was a good feature for a long time. But that question was the further you got away, if you hadn't ever made that connection. You ask somebody like, "Where's the blue water area?" And in the state of Michigan, they might be like, "I don't
I
know,
don't know.
Traverse City,
Yeah.
the Houghton, the UP." Like
Sure.
it's all seems like blue water, but it's like, no,
No,
you haven't
no.
seen blue
You have to
water
see it.
till you see
Yeah.
the blue water area. So I think that's one of those other things of like that shift in what we call ourselves, that blue water area, Thumbcoast. So kind of interesting going on there.
It's
But
very interesting.
it is, we've got the natural attraction, we've got the cultural sites,
Mhm.
and we want to talk about some of the kind of the news, the things that get overlooked, because
Absolutely.
being in the situation we are kind of in a news desert, like we just discussed, that we're on the periphery
Mhm.
of Detroit and Flint. They're both about an hour away. The
Yeah.
news has to be something pretty big going on here,
Yes.
and usually not good
You're
to make like the Detroit news, right?
right.
So, we hope to bring light to some of those things that are going on, and the really cool stuff in our area.
Absolutely. And I know for me, particularly, one of the things that I first connected to when I moved here was, of course, the theater community and the entertainment. And I think a lot of times people don't realize how many local theaters,
We have a
how
theater
much,
district
I
in Port
mean,
Huron.
it's
That's wild.
it's serious. It's when we get to that, because we're not doing that today, but when we get to that and we break down how many theaters there are and what's going on a regular basis and how people can have that exposure. And I think theater is so important for so many reasons, kind of where I have a connection with your family, right? Through the theater, and where I met just a diverse group of people, how important that is, and how people connect to a community, how people can tell stories, all of those things happening through theater. And there's so much theater in this area that it is mind blowing. So that's something I know we will discuss in the future as well.
Like I
So,
said, I'm excited to talk about the history we have of everything has history, right?
of
No matter where you
course,
go. But the history is so rich and unique in this area.
sure.
From Thomas Edison grew up here in town.
Oh,
I
yeah.
am a strong Edison apologist, as you will find. There are people out there who want to bring him down a peg or two, but like,
Yeah.
no, I'll go to bat for Thomas Edison like any day of the week.
Yeah.
He's a cool guy. But there's so much more even beyond that throughout the whole thumb. Unique people,
Hmm.
a unique place,
Yeah.
and and lots there.
Excited. We've got hockey. We've got
Right.
we've got all the things. So we want to just make sure people are exposed to that and doing our best to present it in a way that is magnetic for people, I think. Yeah.
So I think one of the other unique facets that the Thumb Coast and Port Huron in particular has is we are on an international border.
Oh, yes.
Right? And this is something that does not escape many people here for very long.
No, no, it's so normal here that you don't think about it. It's so normal that, we get to the on the bridge, we do these things. It's so normal that you don't even realize the impact that that has, and the especially now in our current time, the impact that that has.
Right. So this is when we were kind of talking about like, hey, what do we want to talk about today? What are some good things? What's a really good kind of meaty thing to dive into, especially for one of our thirst thumbcasts? And we said this is definitely one of these hot button topics that I think we can talk about because
Mhm.
Port Huron and Sarnia are kind of sister cities, but in a way, I've described that they're almost like estranged sister cities, right? Especially compared to how that was. I can give you kind of this historical perspective of that for many years, you go back to the 19th century, Port Huron was much bigger than Sarnia.
Mhm.
There's kind of an explosion of growth in Sarnia in the 20th century, and now Sarnia is well over twice as big as Port
Mhm.
Huron in terms of population.
Okay.
And they're right next to each other. And my grandparents will talk all the time about, oh, yeah, back in the 50s, I'd ride my bike across the Blue Water Bridge.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been cross-border ferries going back all the way to the 20s and 30s,
Absolutely.
right? But they built the Blue Water Bridge in 1938, and when that was built, it was really built to connect two downtowns, like downtown
Mhm.
Port Huron to downtown Sarnia, because the cities were so closely linked. I mean, you were just as likely to go shopping to say, "Hey, I'm going to pop over to Christina Street in Sarnia and do my shopping there,"
Yeah.
than to go shopping here, right? It
Mhm.
was just like the next town over, and it's a couple hundred yards across the river.
Sure. Yeah.
It's a different vibe today because that international border has changed quite a
Oh,
bit.
it's changed. Mhm.
So that's one of the reasons I say it's like kind of estranged sister cities of like there was maybe a lot more of a close knit kind of weave between the two. And today there are some people I know, like my mom works for the school district, and there are people who work in the school district who live in Sarnia, and every day they're
Yes.
over, but we don't see that as much. So, and I imagine, Detroit, Windsor, kind of same thing. Did you ever go to
Absolutely.
Canada when you
Oh
were?
my goodness, we went to Canada all the time, and I remember. Well, I mean, I probably shouldn't say this. Well, I'm gonna say it anyway. The drinking age in Canada is different than it is in the United States. So, not that I'm a drinker because I'm not, but I remember even when we were in high
I
school and
mean,
and
when you're
sneak,
19, you are well
you're
aware
you're ready. You're
that a
like,
couple hundred yards on the other
you're
side of the
like, let me
river.
get to Windsor this weekend. It was such a big deal. But even as our family, that's what we did on the weekend. I remember in Windsor, there was an A&W. I don't know if it's still there, but there was an A&W root beer like right across. And we knew that once we got over there, our parents would stop at A&W and they would come out. And, so we have this connection in not just in the Thumb area, but in Michigan in general, our connection to Canada feels quite strong and maybe different from other states. Maybe
Yeah.
New York has something similar,
I,
but I,
I
I don't,
imagine,
I
yeah.
imagine they do. But for me, being a Michigander, the majority of my life is just like Canada's the next door neighbor. And I was telling someone, when I travel and people ask me where I'm from, and I meet people from Canada, and I say, I'm closer when I live in Port Huron, I'm closer to Sarnia than I am the next city over in Michigan. I'm closer.
Right. It's
Um,
right there.
it's right there. So it's just interesting the changes that we're seeing currently. One of the things I mentioned that I did work in credit unions in the Port Huron area. And one thing about a credit union is a lot of the ways that you can join a credit union, or it has been in the past, is geography.
Okay.
If you lived within a particular area, then you could join this particular credit union. And Sarnia was always in our area that you could join the credit union if you live
Sure.
there, because geographically, you could still do that. So it's just interesting to see the changes that are happening, like even in our nation currently, and how that's affecting the ease with which we were able to cross that border, and how it's becoming more challenging to go to and from, and what that relationship is looking like even with our Canadian neighbors, because they're our neighbors.
Yeah. One of the like one of those historical points that I think of is that that nature of like the Blue Water Bridge changed so much because when it was built, the people who were it opens in October of 1938. They have a big celebration. You know, the governor comes and the governor of Ontario comes, and
Okay.
it's a big deal, right? It's right before World War II.
Mhm.
There's a lot of tensions, but the United States and Canada like were strong allies.
Absolutely.
They're very excited about that. But it was the really big impact was for locals. It was for people from Port Huron to just easily get over to their friends and
Yes.
neighbors in Sarnia. Today, I don't think when we think about the Blue Water Bridge, because they add a second span in the 90s,
Mhm.
and it has we don't think of it as a local bridge. I think in 1938, people saw that much more like the 10th Street Bridge,
Okay.
right? As a bridge that is useful to locals to get
Sure.
from one place to another, because there was no highway system in 1938.
Yeah.
You know, we don't think about today. The Blue Water Bridge is like that is one of the busiest international border crossings on Earth
Yes.
because it's the end of 94, the
Yep.
end of 69, the end of the 401. You know, they're all
Mhm.
converging on this to facilitate this international trade
Yeah.
rather than like, oh, I want to go to the wharf to get fish and chips. That's not the main concern of that bridge anymore is the local folks.
I
It's about
mean,
a bigger picture.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, somebody may still want to go over there for fish and
Right. We
chips,
still
but
get to use this, which
we
is
still get
great.
to, but it makes it more challenging
Yeah, it's got a very
to.
different vibe. And even in my lifetime, so I'm going to turn 35 this month.
All right.
So I can remember very distinctly, I was in middle school on September 11th.
Yeah.
And
I was not. Thank you. Continue, Andrew.
I will ask no probing questions. It's
Nope.
just for my reference for context, right? About how old I was. I was in sixth grade, right? And
I was at
so,
work. Okay.
but I remember that changed like the border and the way an international border works overnight.
100%. And travel. I mean, that it changed everything. So any trying to get from one place to another after 9/11 was definitely changed, but I feel like now we have things that are going on currently. We've got increasing changes that are going on and how that's going to affect, even I wonder how it's going to affect the economy in Port Huron specifically, and
Yeah,
and what
that's
things are going to happen as a result of some of the changes that are being made currently.
like we see all of these things on the news about tariffs and
Oh
obviously
yeah.
like basically starting kind of this trade war. It's one of the biggest times as a historian, I can tell you, this is probably the most tension between the United States and Canada in maybe like 200 years. Like
Of
there's
course it
there's a
is.
lot, right? And there's a lot of people who might see that on the news and they might think about it on a national level. But I also think
Yeah.
about that as like, hey, I don't see as many Ontario plates at like Myers parking lot.
Right.
Right? That
It
has a
it
direct impact on these border towns.
yes. I mean,
Very
it's nothing to
specific.
be at Birchwood Mall and see as many
Yeah.
um Canadian plates as you do Michigan. That's nothing for us, but that's changing. And you're speaking to it, the impact that it's having, internationally and locally and relationally. I have, because I've traveled a lot and I meet different people and I've worked in different places. I have a lot of friends in different places, and
Sure.
that affects, like I have a really good friend in Canada. It's a professional relationship, but we've been trying to get together. It's affecting those things.
Yeah.
It's affecting, do they even want to come here? Some of them, just depending on just listening to the conversations that are happening, they're even more hesitant to want to come here, and it's changing. It's
Yeah.
changing, and the impact, I think, we don't have a clue as of yet, how big this
Yeah,
impact is
long-term
going to be.
impacts. I
Yeah.
mean, you might think of it as like, a couple of neighbors. There's always that old saying, good fences make good neighbors, and it's fine to have a border. And I think there was no one who ever
Absolutely.
realized that there wasn't, a border and you're going to go through customs. But
Yeah.
obviously that changed a lot after 9/11, and
Yep.
then it's changing a lot right now where questions of like national sovereignty are being called into question. It's like, yeah, I can see why. I know
Absolutely.
recently we had kind of the mayors of both Sarnia and Port Huron were having some questions because we have such a long period of friendship. It's amazing to see in Port
So
Huron.
long. Yeah.
One of my favorite things, Port Huron's hockey team. Do you remember what they were called? For many years, we had our minor league hockey team. They were a feeder team for the Red Wings. There's a junior team. You know who I'm talking about? It's the flags.
The flags. No, I
Right?
did not know that.
Okay, so the flags go all the way back to like the 1960s and
Okay.
70s. Some pretty big players, like I said, in the 70s, they were the feeder team for the Red
Sure.
Wings. And the flags have this great jersey that have like it's kind of like a little pretend Canadian flag, a
Okay.
pretend American flag,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
there's it's a yellow maple leaf on a red background and like a yellow eagle on a blue background.
Got
And
it.
like you get
Yep,
what they're
you
talking about,
yeah.
but they're talking about because you saw so many flags in the area and there
Yeah.
was so much of lots of Canadian flags over here. I mean, you go to Bell Tire and they've got a huge Canadian flag out front
100%.
on our side of the border. And you
Yes.
go over there and you see lots of American flags. But
Yeah.
this is where like some of that tension has come from in recent days because I think
Mhm.
that calls into question and changes that relationship between those two areas. And
One
I don't think you
yeah.
see that anywhere else in the state really.
Mhm.
You know, maybe up in the Sioux, I don't know.
Sure.
Maybe a little bit in Detroit, but that's also got a very different vibe,
It's got a
different
different
feeling,
yeah.
especially in Port Huron, where Sarnia's bigger and we share the same river and have
Mhm.
so many of those cross-border connections.
Yeah.
So that'll be something for us to keep our eyes on.
We have to keep our eyes on it because I'm sure there's gonna be more, um
This is
I'm
yeah,
quite sure there's gonna be there's gonna be different legislation and things that come down that's gonna affect how we can relate moving forward. And so
yeah.
we've got to watch that, and we've got to be mindful, and we've got to be sensitive. We've got to be proactive. We've got to do a lot of things and just be on our p's and q's, as my mom used to say all the time.
Well, I think we'll be able to offer a unique perspective for not only our viewers and our listeners, but
Yeah.
hopefully, maybe if we got the powers that be tune in, this is something that we can offer this unique perspective on our relationship with Canada and so many other things.
Yes.
So this is the kind of thing that we'll get to talk about, like week after week after week, because we've got lots and lots to cover.
And I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be here, excited to be chatting with you, excited to see what this Thumbcast is going to bring and what our viewers are going to enjoy and what they're going to ask for. So
Mighty oaks from little acorns grow. So
yes.
we've got a lot. So I'm really looking forward to coming back here to keep those conversations going. And like our tagline says, these are coastline conversations right here.
Yeah.
And I'm excited. So maybe until next time on the Thumbcast.
Thanks so much for chatting with me today, Andrew. I enjoyed it, and I hope you all enjoyed it as well. But this is not the last you will see of us. We will be back having more insightful conversations, meeting with some beautiful people and talking to them about unique things.
Yeah, some interviews lined up. We got a lot on our plate. So
So stay tuned for the next Thumbcast.
buckle up.